William Harrington never believed in coincidences, much less miracles. This 38-year-old entrepreneur had built his renewable energy empire on concrete data, detailed analyses, and purely rational decisions. Throughout his adult life, he cultivated a reputation as a pragmatic man, skeptical of anything that couldn't be measured, tested, or scientifically proven. So when his flight from Berlin was cancelled due to last-minute technical problems, he simply reorganized his plans and decided to spend the early morning hours working quietly at home, reviewing important contracts that demanded his full attention. William always functioned better during the silent hours of the early morning, when he could concentrate completely without the constant interruptions of the corporate world. Harrington Manor was an imposing estate, built in the early 1900s by his great-grandfather, an Irish immigrant who had made a fortune in the railroad industry. The house stood majestically amidst 5 acres of meticulously landscaped gardens, its stone walls and wide corridors echoing the history of 4 generations of the family. It was precisely 3:15 a.m. when William entered silently through the front door, using his keys with extreme care to avoid making any noise that might wake Eleanor, his stepmother. For all 28 years of their cohabitation since she married his father, Robert, William had always considered her an excessively religious woman, constantly involved in morning prayers, endless novenas, Catholic rituals, and devotional practices that he saw as unnecessary superstition and a waste of time. William respected Eleanor's faith, in the same polite way he respected any personal characteristic of close people he couldn't fully understand, but he had never genuinely been interested in her spirituality, or tried to understand the deeper motivations behind her seemingly unwavering religious devotion. To him, Eleanor was simply a kind but overly mystical woman who had brought emotional stability to his father during his years of widowhood. The manor was immersed in the characteristic silence of the deepest hours of the early morning, that kind of quietude that seems to amplify every small sound and make every breath sound louder than it should. William knew every inch of that house, every creaking step, every door that made a noise when opened. He had grown up exploring every corner, every secret passage that the architects of the last century had included in the original design. As he carefully climbed the main stairs toward his office on the 2nd floor, William noticed a soft, golden light emanating from the 1st floor library. It was a faint luminosity, like that of lit candles, completely different from the normal electric light. His first thought was genuine concern about the possibility of an intruder who had managed to enter the property, despite all the advanced security systems they had installed in recent years. He silently changed direction, going down a few steps and cautiously approaching the library, prepared to confront any possible intruder. But when he finally managed to see the interior of the room through the slightly ajar door, what he found left him completely perplexed and profoundly disturbed in a way he had never experienced before. Eleanor was kneeling in the center of the library, positioned on an oriental rug that had belonged to her grandmother. Before her, there was a makeshift altar that she had obviously assembled with meticulous care. Dozens of candles of different sizes created an almost sacred atmosphere, their flames dancing softly and casting moving shadows on the bookshelves laden with antique books. Fresh flowers, white roses, lilies, carnations were carefully arranged in small crystal vases around the altar. There were also some objects that William recognized as having belonged to his mother, Hope, a pearl rosary, a small porcelain statuette, a silk scarf that still vaguely held the perfume she used to wear. But what shocked William most was discovering that the absolute center of that makeshift altar was occupied by a framed photograph of his mother, Hope. Not just any photograph, but a portrait he hadn't seen in many years. An image of Hope, smiling radiantly, younger and more vibrant than his clearest memories could recreate. Eleanor held this photograph with both hands, as if it were the most precious and sacred object in the world. Tears flowed silently down her face, leaving bright trails that reflected the golden light of the candles. She was whispering fervent prayers in a tone of voice that mixed desperate plea, profound gratitude, and an emotional urgency that William had never noticed in her normal devotions. "Please, Hope, protect him one more time," she murmured with an intimacy that suggested familiar and constant conversation. "You told me during this morning's dream that there would be real danger this week. I trust you completely. I've always trusted you since the first day. But I'm so afraid of not being able to interpret it correctly, or of not being able to save him in time from something terrible." William was literally paralyzed, his body refusing to move while his mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. Eleanor was talking to his mother's picture as if Hope could hear every word and respond. Somehow, as if she maintained regular and intimate communication with a person who had died over 3 decades ago. Even more disturbing was the fact that Eleanor was specifically talking about protecting him from some imminent danger that he was completely unaware of. What danger? How could she know something he himself ignored? And why would she act as if she had some special responsibility for his safety and well-being? "I know he doesn't believe in any of this," Eleanor continued. Her voice choked with genuine and profound emotion. "I know he thinks I'm just a superstitious old woman who clings to meaningless rituals. But you know my heart better than anyone. Hope, you know that absolutely everything I do is out of genuine love for him, out of love for the sacred vow I made to you in that first vision." What vow? William felt as if he were discovering a completely different version of Eleanor, a secret version that included deep spiritual relationships and mysterious connections with his dead mother. Over all these years, living together, he'd assumed Carmen's intense religiosity was just a generic, personal characteristic, a natural inclination towards traditional Catholic devotional practices. He'd never imagined her spirituality could be specifically connected to her family, much less that it might involve some kind of regular communication with Esperanza. The possibility was so unsettling, so challenging to his worldview, that he felt physically nauseous just trying to consider it seriously. If you've ever discovered that someone close to you maintained secret spiritual rituals or practices specifically related to their family, leave a super thanks to support stories that bravely explore the deepest mysteries of faith and family protection. Your contribution allows us to continue investigating the seemingly inexplicable connections that exist between unconditional love, genuine spirituality, and protection that transcends physical life. In the 3 days following that disturbing discovery, Mauricio couldn't concentrate on practically anything except the scene he'd witnessed in the library. The image of Carmen kneeling before the makeshift altar, speaking intimately with her mother's photograph, replayed constantly in his mind like a film he couldn't stop watching. Carmen had spoken specifically about imminent danger, about urgent protection, about sacred promises made to her mother. These words echoed in his consciousness during business meetings, meals, and especially during the silent hours of the night when he tried to sleep. What kind of danger had she mentioned? How could a 52-year-old woman have knowledge of threats he himself was completely unaware of? Mauricio began to observe Carmen with completely renewed eyes, noticing behavioral patterns and habits that had always been present, but which he had systematically ignored, or interpreted superficially during decades of cohabitation. For the first time in his adult life, he began to pay genuine attention to his stepmother's daily routines with scientific curiosity and growing unease. Carmen really did disappear every night at 3 o'clock in the morning, without exception. Mauricio discreetly checked for a whole week, strategically positioning himself at different points in the mansion to observe her nocturnal movements. He discovered that she always got up at the same precise time, remained absent for exactly 60 minutes, and silently returned to her room as if fulfilling a sacred and absolutely inviolable commitment. It was as if Carmen had a scheduled meeting that transcended sleep, tiredness, weather, or any other practical consideration. Mauricio had never paid attention to this routine during all the years of living together, simply assuming that she had occasional insomnia or morning religious habits that didn't affect the rest of the family. Even more intriguing and disturbing was realizing that Carmen demonstrated specific knowledge about aspects of his personal and professional life that she shouldn't logically possess. During a seemingly casual conversation about his business over breakfast on Tuesday, she mentioned detailed concerns about a new German business partner whom he hadn't yet officially introduced to the family or mentioned at home. "How did you know about Brenner Industries?" he'd asked, genuinely curious about the source of her information. "I just have a very strong feeling about that company," Carmen had replied with a strange expression in her eyes. "Something tells me you should be extremely cautious with any business involving these people. Please, trust me this time and investigate more thoroughly before committing to anything." When Mauricio tried to press for more details about the origin of these feelings, Carmen quickly changed the subject and took refuge in household chores, clearly avoiding giving more specific explanations about her seemingly unfounded concerns. This conversation made Mauricio start to remember similar situations from the past that took on completely new meaning in light of what he had witnessed in the library. He began to recognize a pattern that stretched back decades, moments when Carmen had convinced him to change important plans at the last minute, claiming inexplicable premonitions. And then he discovered that he had avoided significant problems or even dangerous situations. There was the time she convinced him to cancel a business trip to São Paulo on a Friday in March 2019, insisting she had a bad feeling about that specific day. Mauricio had been irritated by what he considered superstition interfering with important professional commitments, but he gave in to avoid family conflicts. He later discovered that there had been a serious accident on the highway he would have used at the exact time he would have been traveling. He also remembered the episode involving Carlos Mendoza, a business partner in whom he had placed great trust during 2021. Carmen always treated Mendoza with a polite but noticeable coldness, showing obvious discomfort whenever he visited the mansion for business meetings. When Mauricio questioned her behavior, she only said that she didn't trust that man for reasons she couldn't rationally explain. Months later, Mauricio discovered that Mendoza was involved in complex financial irregularities that could have seriously compromised his company if he hadn't discovered them in time. Carmen's instinctive coldness towards the man had been completely justified, even though she didn't have access to any concrete information that could explain her suspicions. Mauricio's curiosity and unease intensified exponentially when, during a visit to Carmen's personal office to retrieve documents related to household finances, he accidentally found an old and obviously well-used notebook that was partially hidden under some papers in a slightly open drawer. The notebook had a worn brown leather cover, aged by time and constant use, with yellowed pages that had clearly been written on over many years, driven by a curiosity that he himself couldn't fully explain. Mauricio quickly flipped through some pages and discovered that it was full of precisely dated notes, all made during the early morning hours. The entries were written in a handwriting that he immediately recognized as Carmen's, but the content was completely different from anything he would expect to find. These weren't generic religious reflections or traditional prayers, but detailed accounts of visions, dreams, and messages she claimed to receive regularly. March 15th, 2019, 3:20 a.m. Esperanza appeared in my dream tonight, showing Mauricio in grave danger, inside a dark car, on a rain-soaked road. I saw twisted metal, shattered, glass, blood. She told me I need to convince him not to travel to Sao Paulo this Friday. I need to find a way to do this, without revealing the true source of my worry. July 3rd, 2021, 3:45 a.m. I dreamt again of Esperanza, warning me about Mauricio's new business partner. This man, Carlos Mendoza. She showed me forged documents, a lot of money disappearing, and Mauricio being deceived by someone he completely trusts. I must find a way to alert him to the dangers of this business relationship, without seeming nosy or paranoid. November 18th, 2022, 3:15 a.m. Esperanza came to me today with a very specific warning about dangerous international investments Mauricio is considering. She showed me German documents, European authorities, an investigation that will put our family at the center of a financial scandal. If he goes ahead with these plans, I need to convince him to be more cautious. Mauricio remembered each of these situations perfectly. The trip to Sao Paulo that Carmen convinced him to postpone, citing an inexplicable premonition about that specific day. The business partner she always treated with polite but evident suspicion, until he himself discovered the financial irregularities months later. And now, apparently, there was some concern about his current German dealings. The accuracy of the details documented in the diary, combined with the proven accuracy of previous predictions, created a situation that completely defied his rational understanding of the world. How could Carmen have prior knowledge of specific events that even he himself didn't know about until they happened? The psychological and emotional tension reached its peak when Carmen approached him one Thursday morning with an expression of deep concern and urgency he had rarely seen on her face during all their years together. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of genuine fear and desperate determination. "Mauricio," she said, her voice heavy with a seriousness that immediately commanded his full attention, "I need you to promise me something very important. Don't close that contract with the German company Brenner Industries this week. Please, I beg you. Trust me just this one time." "Why not? What specific problem would there be with this contract? It's a deal that could bring millions of dollars to the company." "I have a very strong feeling, stronger than any I've ever had, that something terrible will go wrong if you sign those documents now. Very, very wrong. Please, just delay the signing for a few days until I can better explain my concern. Carmen, you must understand that I can't make business decisions involving millions of dollars based solely on your religious premonitions. I need concrete reasons, verifiable data, specific information." The expression of deep pain that crossed Carmen's face made him feel cruel and insensitive, but his fundamental rationality didn't allow him to change important business plans based on what he considered superstitions, however well-intentioned they might be. That night, at 2:30 in the morning, Mauricio decided to confront Carmen directly about her secret nightly prayers, her seemingly accurate premonitions, and the entire mysterious situation he had discovered. He could no longer continue ignoring something that obviously had profound implications for his life and his business. Have you ever faced the psychologically devastating dilemma of following your well-established rational logic or completely trusting the seemingly inexplicable intuition of someone you deeply love. If this complex tension between faith and reason is touching your heart, consider leaving a super thanks. Every valuable contribution helps us continue exploring the deepest complexities of family relationships, when fundamentally different worldviews collide irreconcilably. At precisely 3 o'clock in the morning of that crucial Thursday, Mauricio strategically positioned himself in the first-floor hallway and waited silently until he saw Carmen emerging from her room and heading with determined steps towards the library. This time, instead of secretly observing from the shadows, he decided to follow her directly and confront her about the nightly rituals she had been practicing for decades. Apparently, without anyone in the family knowing, he let her enter the library and begin her usual preparations, carefully lighting the candles, arranging the fresh flowers, positioning Esperanza's photograph in the center of the makeshift altar. Then, when she was kneeling and about to begin her intimate prayers, he abruptly switched on all the main lights in the library, flooding the room with electric light that contrasted drastically with the sacred and mysterious atmosphere created by the candles. "Carmen, we need to talk right now about what you do here every night." She turned instantly, completely startled by the unexpected interruption of a ritual she obviously considered deeply private and sacred. She still held Esperanza's framed photograph against her chest, and her face was wet with fresh tears, reflecting both the candlelight and the electric lighting. There was an expression of absolute panic in her eyes, as if she had been caught in something extremely intimate and potentially embarrassing. "Mauricio, you shouldn't be here during this moment. This is something very particular and personal." "Why not? This is my house too, and I've lived here for 38 years. I want to fully understand what you do in this library every night at 3 in the morning. For 28 consecutive years." The silence that followed was charged with an almost tangible, electric tension. Carmen looked alternately at the photograph in her hands, at the carefully prepared altar with candles and flowers, and finally at Mauricio's face, with a complex expression that mixed genuine fear of judgment, shame at being discovered, and a growing determination that suggested that perhaps the time had finally come to reveal truths she had kept secret for decades. "You won't believe me if I tell you the whole truth," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "Try explaining it to me, and let me decide whether or not I can believe you." Carmen took a deep breath, as if preparing to cross a line of no return, and then spoke the words that would change their relationship forever. "Your mother speaks to me regularly, Mauricio. Esperanza communicates with me through dreams and visions, even before I met your father, Rodrigo. She spiritually chose me to protect this family, and for all these years she has guided me with specific instructions to keep you safe from dangers you can't even imagine exist." The statement fell into the silence of the library like an explosion, reverberating off the shelves packed with books. Mauricio felt physically dizzy, as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet and he was falling through alternate realities that defied everything he believed about the nature of existence. "That's completely impossible, Carmen. My mother didn't believe in anything related to spiritualism, communicating with the dead, or supernatural phenomena of any kind. She was skeptical, rational, scientific in her approach to life. She would never get involved in that sort of thing. Death transforms people in ways we can't fully comprehend, Mauricio. Or perhaps it reveals aspects of who they always were beneath the superficial skepticism and rational defenses they built during their physical lives. Esperanza started appearing to me in very vivid dreams 3 full years before I met your father, Rodrigo, at the library where I worked. Carmen carefully approached a specific shelf and removed an object hidden behind some books. A large and visibly old notebook, with leather covers worn by time and constant use over many years. This is my personal spiritual journal, Mauricio. 30 full years meticulously documenting every vision, every specific warning, every detailed instruction I received from your mother, including all the times I managed to protect you from real dangers you never knew existed because I prevented them before they fully materialized. Mauricio took the notebook with visibly trembling hands and began reading randomly selected entries, trying to process information that fundamentally challenged his basic understanding of reality. April 12th, 1995, 3:30 a.m. Esperanza showed me in a very clear vision Mauricio falling from a very tall tree in the back garden. I saw the branch breaking. I saw him hitting his head on a large stone. I saw a lot of blood. I convinced Rodrigo to cut down the dangerous branch of the old oak tree before something terrible happened to the boy. September 8th, 2003, 3:15 a.m. I dreamed that Mauricio was drowning in a swimming pool during a birthday party. The water was murky. There were many people. No one realized he was in real danger. I insisted that Rodrigo hire extra professional lifeguards for the birthday party, even though it seemed excessive for only 15 guests. November 23rd, 2015, 3:45 a.m. Esperanza warned me about a serious car accident involving Mauricio next Tuesday. She showed me the specific intersection, the exact time, the type of vehicle that would cause the collision. I discreetly sabotaged his car so it wouldn't work on the day she had identified as dangerous. He was very angry about missing important meetings, but he avoided an accident that could have been fatal. June 5th, 2018, 3:20 a.m. Very specific vision about heart problems that Mauricio would develop if he continued with his current level of stress and poor diet. Esperanza showed me him fainting in the office, being taken to the hospital, doctors talking about premature heart attack. I secretly started modifying his diet, adding specific foods that his mother indicated to me without him noticing the changes. Carmen, this is absolutely impossible to believe for any rational person. I know perfectly well that it's hard to accept Mauricio. That's why I never told anyone. That's why I pray in absolute secrecy during the early morning hours. That's why I keep this spiritual connection completely out of your skeptical eyes and your need for scientific explanations for everything. She paused, closing her eyes as if accessing a particularly painful memory or trying to gather the courage to reveal something even more disturbing. But, Mauricio, your mother warned me about something extremely serious that will happen to you this week if you sign that contract with the German Brenner Industries. I saw you being arrested. I saw your reputation being completely destroyed. I saw your company in complete ruins. The contract is an elaborate trap. Esperanza showed me forged documents, secret international investigations, European authorities who will put you at the center of an international financial scandal that will destroy everything you've built. That's completely absurd and paranoid, Carmen. I personally investigated everything about this company for months. I have specialized lawyers, international consultants, detailed background checks. Not everything can be discovered or verified by conventional investigative methods, Mauricio. Sometimes we need to rely on sources of information that transcend purely rational logic and normal bureaucratic procedures. The discussion was abruptly interrupted by the urgent ring of Mauricio's cell phone. The display showed that it was his main lawyer, Klaus Weber, calling directly from Frankfurt at 9 o'clock in the morning local German time. It was extremely unusual for Klaus to call so early, especially considering that he knew Mauricio would be asleep in the Brazilian time zone. Mauricio, Don't sign anything with Brenner Industries under any circumstances, Klaus said immediately, without even greeting him first. We just found out through confidential sources that they are under secret investigation by Europol for international money laundering and financing of criminal activities. Any individual or legal entity that enters into contracts with them in the coming weeks will be automatically included in the investigation as a suspected accomplice. Mauricio hung up the phone in a state of complete psychological shock, looking alternately at the phone in his hand and at Carmen's face, who watched him with an expression that mixed compassion, concern, and something that seemed to be relief at finally being able to reveal truths she had kept to herself for so long. How could you possibly know about a secret international investigation that even my specialized lawyers didn't know about until this very moment? Have you ever had to acknowledge that someone in your life possessed seemingly inexplicable knowledge or abilities that completely defied your established rational understanding of the world? If this profound revelation about spiritual protection is touching your heart, leave us super thanks. Your contribution allows us to continue bravely exploring the most mysterious frontiers between faith, intuition, and family protection that transcends conventional explanations. The silence in the library after that devastating phone call was profound, completely transformative. Mauricio looked alternately at the phone still trembling in his hand, at Carmen's bulky spiritual diary, and at the face of the woman he had dramatically underestimated and superficially judged for 3 entire decades of family life. His entire fundamental belief system, carefully constructed over decades of scientific education and rational business experience, was being simultaneously challenged by evidence he couldn't easily explain or dismiss. How could a woman he always considered overly religious and superstitious have specific knowledge about a secret international investigation that even his lawyers specializing in European commercial law hadn't uncovered until that moment? How could you know about a Europol investigation that professionals paid specifically to protect my interests didn't know about? Carmen sat heavily in one of the library's antique armchairs, as if the emotional weight of finally revealing secrets kept for decades was physically exhausting. The candles still burned around the makeshift altar, creating an atmosphere that blended the sacred with the surreal. "I don't know exactly how the process works, Mauricio," she said. "I can only say it's worked consistently for over 30 years. Esperanza shows me future situations, dangerous people, specific threats you'll face. Sometimes they're extremely clear and detailed visions. Sometimes just very strong feelings accompanied by fragmented images. But for 3 entire decades, this guidance has never failed, not once. Why didn't you ever tell me about this before? Why keep it a secret for so long?" Carmen looked directly into Mauricio's eyes for the first time during that revealing conversation. "Because you're exactly like your mother was during her physical life, completely skeptical, purely rational, scientific in your approach to anything that can't be measured or tested in a laboratory. Esperanza herself probably wouldn't believe what she became capable of doing after leaving the physical body. I knew with absolute certainty that you would see me as mentally unbalanced or completely delusional if you knew the complete truth about my spiritual practices." Mauricio approached the makeshift altar and looked more closely at the central photograph of his mother. It was an image he hadn't seen in many years, a portrait of Esperanza, smiling with a luminosity that his conscious memories couldn't recreate with complete accuracy. There was something in her expression that suggested profound knowledge, wisdom that transcended her apparent age at the time of the photo. If all this you're telling me is true, why specifically did she choose you for this responsibility? Carmen opened the spiritual diary to a specific page marked with an antique bookmark and showed Mauricio an entry that seemed particularly important. This is the first complete vision I had about your family. 3 full years before I met your father, Rodrigo, she read aloud. Esperanza appeared to me saying verbatim, "There is a widowed man suffering deeply from my premature departure, and a boy who will grow up without adequate maternal guidance during the most formative years of his personality. You have been chosen to be responsible for protecting them spiritually, even if they never fully understand what you do for them or where your ability to prevent disasters comes from. And you simply accepted this impossible responsibility. At first, I genuinely thought I was developing some kind of serious psychological problem. I considered seeking professional psychiatric help because the visions were so vivid and disturbing that they caused me constant insomnia and anxiety, but gradually the visions became more specific, more detailed, including information that I couldn't have obtained through normal means." Carmen turned a few pages of the diary and pointed to specific entries. She showed me the exact places you would go, the specific people you would interact with, the dangerous situations you would face. And when I met Rodrigo at the municipal library, exactly as and when she had shown me in repetitive dreams, I knew definitively that I wasn't imagining anything. For all these years, you've been protecting me from things I didn't even know existed. Mauricio flipped through more pages of the diary, finding decades of meticulous notes on preventative spiritual protection, specific warnings that materialized exactly as predicted, dangers avoided through discreet interventions he had never noticed or questioned. Along with your father, Rodrigo, yes. Rodrigo began to develop genuine religious faith over the years of marriage because he was a personal and direct witness to many of these spiritual protections. He saw too much concrete evidence to remain skeptical. You, on the other hand, have always been more intensely like your mother during her physical life, someone who needs tangible proof and scientific explanations to believe in anything that challenges conventional rationality. That's why my father became religious after years of being agnostic. He saw miracles happening regularly in our family, Mauricio. Prevention of accidents that would have been fatal. Guidance on investments that saved our financial stability. Warnings about dangerous people who were trying to take advantage of you. Rodrigo could no longer deny that there were spiritual forces actively working to keep our family protected. Carmen stood up and walked to a library window, looking out at the moonlit garden that shone through the old trees of the property. Your father also began to have his own spiritual experiences during his last years of life. Esperanza occasionally appeared to him in dreams, especially when he was going through difficult periods of depression or longing. She comforted him, guided him, gradually preparing him for the transition he would make when the time came to leave. Ethan sat in an armchair beside Clara, holding the spiritual journal in his hands, trying to process decades of revelations that completely reshaped his understanding of his own family and the nature of reality. If I accept that all this is true, that my mother really communicates spiritually with you for 3 decades, this would fundamentally change everything about how I see the world, life, death, and the purpose of existence. It doesn't need to change everything at once, Ethan. Just accept that there are profound mysteries and inexplicable phenomena that your purely rational mind cannot fully comprehend, but that your heart and your intuition can recognize as genuinely true if you allow that openness. Clara returned to the altar and knelt again, carefully picking up Esperanza's photograph. Your mother told me something very specific about you during one of the first visions I had. She said you inherited her analytical intelligence and scientific skepticism, But you also inherited a deep spiritual sensitivity that remains dormant because you're afraid of seeming irrational or vulnerable. She said that when you were finally ready to accept truths that transcend logical explanation, you would become a much more complete and powerful person. In the months that followed that transformative revelation in the library, Ethan underwent a gradual but profound process of re-evaluating his fundamental beliefs about reality, spirituality, and the limits of human knowledge. It wasn't a sudden or dramatic transformation, but a careful evolution of his understanding of aspects of existence he had automatically rejected throughout his adult life. He began to develop a genuine and deep respect for Clara and her spiritual practices, recognizing that what he had interpreted for decades as excessive superstition was in reality the dedicated work of a person with genuinely extraordinary abilities. He came to see her 3 a.m. prayers not as conventional religious rituals, but as sessions of spiritual work where she maintained an active channel of communication between dimensions to protect those she loved. Ethan also began to pay genuine attention to Clara's hunches and guidance, discovering that they were consistently accurate in ways that defied rational explanation but could not be ignored by anyone honest. When she expressed concerns about people, situations, or business decisions, he began to investigate more thoroughly before proceeding, frequently uncovering problems or dangers he hadn't identified through his conventional methods of analysis. More importantly, he began to realize that his resistance to spirituality had been based not on genuine scientific skepticism, but on fear of admitting that there were aspects of reality that his rational mind could not control or explain completely. The transformation of his relationship with Clara forced him to confront limitations in his own worldview that he had refused to acknowledge for decades. Clara, in turn, flourished under the recognition and acceptance finally offered by Ethan. For the first time in 3 decades, she could openly talk about her spiritual experiences, share the visions she received, and explain the deep motivations behind her devotional practices. The validation of her abilities by Ethan freed her from the isolation she had experienced for so many years, keeping secrets she knew to be true but couldn't prove to skeptical people. The transformation of their relationship also brought a completely new dimension to the family dynamic. Ethan came to see Clara not only as his stepmother, but as a spiritual guardian, appointed by his own mother to continue protecting the family through means that transcended conventional methods of care and protection. During this period of adaptation and mutual growth, several specific situations confirmed for Ethan the extraordinary accuracy of Clara's spiritual abilities. There was the case of the real estate investment in Miami that she warned him to avoid based on visions of future legal problems. He later discovered that the property was under investigation for money laundering, and all investors were included in complex legal proceedings. There was also the situation involving a potential marriage to a woman whom Clara politely but consistently discouraged, claiming that she received guidance about deep incompatibilities that would manifest over time. Ethan initially resisted this guidance, but eventually discovered aspects of the woman's character that completely confirmed Clara's spiritual concerns. Perhaps even more impressive was when Clara warned him about a specific health problem he would develop if he didn't make immediate changes to his diet and exercise routine. Preventative medical exams confirmed exactly the concerns she had expressed, allowing early treatment that avoided serious complications. These accumulated experiences convinced Ethan that Clara genuinely possessed perceptive abilities that transcended normal senses and conventional methods of obtaining information. Gradually, He began to consult her regularly on important decisions, not as a substitute for rational analysis and professional due diligence, but as an additional source of insights that could reveal aspects of situations that conventional methods couldn't detect. The relationship between them evolved to become a partnership where his expertise in rational analysis and strategic planning combined with Clara's intuitive and spiritual abilities to create a more complete and effective decision-making system than either of them could achieve individually. This collaboration proved especially valuable in his business, where the combination of rigorous financial analysis with spiritual guidance on the integrity and reliability of potential partners resulted in a series of extraordinary successes and avoidance of pitfalls that would have been devastating to his company. Ethan also began to seriously study spirituality, reading extensively about paranormal phenomena, interdimensional communication, and mystical experiences documented throughout human history. He discovered that Carmen's experiences were consistent with accounts from mystics, mediums, and spiritually sensitive individuals across many cultures and religious traditions. This spiritual education helped him develop a conceptual framework to understand Carmen's abilities within a broader context of human potential and realities that transcend normal physical experience. He began to see spirituality not as primitive superstition, but as a legitimate aspect of human experience that had been inadequately studied by conventional science. If this story has made you reflect on the seemingly mysterious ways protection and love can manifest in our lives through people with special sensitivities, consider leaving a super thanks. Each valuable contribution allows us to continue exploring these profound truths about spirituality, family, and the seemingly inexplicable connections that exist between unconditional love and protection that transcends the limitations of physical existence. Years after these transformative revelations, when Mauricio married a wonderful woman whom Carmen had enthusiastically approved after receiving positive spiritual guidance about the relationship, it was Carmen who alerted him to the need to create a specific educational fund for orphaned children who had lost young mothers. Hope showed me in a very clear vision that this would be one of the most important and meaningful philanthropic missions of our family, Carmen explained during one of their regular morning conversations. She told me that helping children in situations similar to the one you faced as a boy would be a way to honor her memory and to transform the pain of loss into a source of healing for other families. The Esperanza Santa Marina Educational Fund became one of the most successful and respected philanthropic initiatives in the country, helping thousands of children who had lost mothers during childhood to receive quality education, specialized psychological support, and guidance to overcome trauma and develop emotional resilience. Mauricio discovered that administering this fund brought him a deep satisfaction that transcended any commercial success he had achieved. Seeing traumatized children transform into confident and well-adjusted young adults gave him a new understanding of life purpose and family legacy that he had never considered during his years focused exclusively on business growth. Carmen continued her 3 a.m. prayers faithfully until she was 82 years old, maintaining her role as a spiritual bridge between Esperanza and the Santa Marina family. Her intuitive abilities remained accurate and valuable until the end of her life, helping Mauricio navigate important decisions in both business and personal matters. When Carmen finally died peacefully in her sleep one spring morning, Mauricio found a carefully sealed letter left specifically for him on her nightstand. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before her death, suggesting that she had received spiritual guidance about the timing of her departure. "My dearest Mauricio," the letter began, If you are reading this letter, it means that my work on this earthly plane is complete, and the time has come for me to make my own spiritual transition. Throughout all these wonderful years, it has been an extraordinary privilege and a sacred honor to serve as a channel of communication between you and your true mother, Esperanza. Esperanza told me during our last spiritual conversation that you are now completely prepared and mature to walk with her protection and guidance directly without needing human intermediaries like me. You have developed your own spiritual sensitivity sufficiently to receive intuitive guidance when needed, and your family is established on a solid foundation of love, purpose, and service to others. Always continue believing that genuine love completely transcends the limitations of physical death, and that those who truly love us always find creative ways to protect and guide us, even when we don't fully understand the mechanisms through which that protection works. The responsibility of spiritually protecting future generations of the Santa Marina family now passes to you. Trust your developed intuition, pay attention to the meaningful dreams you will receive, and remain open to guidance that arrives through channels that your rational mind cannot fully explain. Esperanza will always be with you, as will I, working together from the other side to ensure that your family continues to be protected, prosperous, and dedicated to using its blessings to help others who face challenges similar to those we overcame together. With eternal love and infinite gratitude for the years we shared discovering the mysteries of faith, Carmen. The Santa Marina mansion was never quite the same without Carmen's regular nighttime prayers softly echoing through the library during the silent hours of the early morning. But Mauricio discovered he had developed his own unique form of spiritual connection that transcended specific religious denominations. His faith evolved to be based not on abstract theological dogmas or traditional rituals, but on the personal evidence accumulated over decades that genuine family love can persist and continue to protect through dimensions that the purely rational mind will never be able to fully explain or categorize. During moments of particularly important or challenging decisions, especially those related to the well-being of his own growing family or the direction of the family's philanthropic activities, Mauricio frequently felt a familiar and comforting presence guiding his thoughts and intuitions. It was a subtle yet unmistakable combination of the practical spiritual wisdom he had learned from Carmen over the years, combined with the eternal and protective love of Esperanza. The two working harmoniously together from higher dimensions to continue protecting and guiding future generations of the Santa Marina family. And sometimes, during the quietest and most contemplative nights, when facing decisions that would have lasting impacts on the lives of people he loved, Mauricio swore he could feel not just one, but two loving feminine presences around him, his biological mother and his spiritual mother, united in a common purpose of ensuring that the legacy of love, protection, and compassionate service continued to positively influence the world through the actions of the family they had chosen to protect through the apparent limitations of physical death. The extraordinary story of Mauricio and Carmen became an inspiring legend in their community, a testament to the fact that the deepest, most meaningful connections between human beings often transcend conventional rational explanations. They can involve dimensions of reality that challenge our current scientific understanding, but are completely real for those who have the courage and humility to acknowledge that the mysteries of love, family, and spiritual protection are infinitely more complex and wonderful than our limited minds can fully grasp. In the years following Carmen's death, the Santa Marina family continued to thrive under the combined spiritual guidance Mauricio had learned to receive and interpret. His renewable energy company expanded internationally, always making decisions that blended rigorous analysis with intuitive insights he had learned to value and trust during his personal transformation. One of the most remarkable experiences happened when Mauricio was considering expanding his business to South Africa. All financial analyses indicated it would be a lucrative and strategically sound investment. But for several consecutive nights, he had vivid dreams where he saw serious political problems, social instability, and his company being nationalized by the local government. Initially, he tried to dismiss these dreams as normal anxiety about an investment in unfamiliar territory. But the images were so specific and consistent that he decided to investigate more thoroughly through political consultants specializing in the region. He discovered that there were indeed growing political tensions that weren't being adequately reported in the international media, and that foreign companies in the energy sector were increasingly viewed with suspicion by the local government. The decision not to invest in South Africa proved extremely wise when, 6 months later, the South African government implemented policies that effectively nationalized several foreign energy companies, causing billions of dollars in losses for international investors who hadn't anticipated these political shifts. Experiences like this convinced Mauricio that he had genuinely developed an ability to receive guidance that transcended conventional risk analysis methods. He began documenting these intuitive insights with the same meticulous care that Carmen had done for decades, creating his own spiritual journal that became a valuable tool for making important decisions. When he married Isabella, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma who shared his passion for philanthropic work, it was through a clear dream that he received guidance on the ideal time to propose marriage. In the dream, he saw Carmen and Esperanza together, smiling and indicating that Isabella would be not only a wonderful wife, but also an essential partner in the mission to help orphan children through the educational fund. The wedding was celebrated in a simple but profoundly meaningful ceremony in the garden of the Santa Marina mansion, exactly where Carmen used to walk during her morning meditations. During the ceremony, several people commented on an inexplicable feeling of loving presence and blessing that seemed to envelop the entire event. Isabella adapted naturally to the spiritual dynamics of the Santa Marina family, bringing her own intuitive sensibilities that perfectly complemented the abilities Mauricio had developed. She frequently received insights about the children served by the educational fund, guidance on which therapeutic approaches would be most effective for specific cases, and intuitions about young people who had special potential but needed additional support. Together, they transformed the Esperanza Santa Marina Fund into one of the most innovative and effective philanthropic organizations in the country. They developed programs that not only provided education and psychological support for orphaned children, but also trained other adults to recognize and develop their own intuitive abilities to better care for traumatized children. One of the most successful programs was called Intuitive Guardians, specialized training for teachers, psychologists, and caregivers who worked with children who had lost parents. The program taught techniques to develop sensitivity to emotional needs that children couldn't express verbally, methods for creating healing environments that transcended conventional therapy, and ways to recognize subtle signs that a child was ready for different stages of the healing process. Isabella discovered that many of the professionals who excelled in this program had their own experiences with significant loss during childhood, as if properly processed personal trauma could be transformed into a special ability to help others facing similar challenges. When Mauricio and Isabella had their first children, twins whom they named Esperanza and Gabriel, Significant spiritual experiences surrounded both the pregnancy and the birth. During the pregnancy, Isabella had regular dreams where an older female figure, whom she intuited was Mauricio's mother, gave her specific guidance on nutrition, exercise, and emotional preparation for motherhood. The birth of the twins was accompanied by a series of remarkable synchronicities. Esperanza was born exactly at 3 in the morning, the same time Carmen used to say her daily prayers. Gabriel was born 20 minutes later, and his first action was to reach out towards a photograph of Carmen that Isabella had brought to the hospital, as if recognizing someone familiar. The children grew up in an environment where spirituality was treated as a natural part of life, not as something mysterious or frightening. From an early age, they demonstrated intuitive sensibilities that their parents carefully recognized and nurtured. Esperanza frequently played with invisible friends, whom she described in ways that reminded both Carmen and the grandmother Esperanza she had never known physically. Gabriel developed a notable ability to sense when other people were upset or emotionally hurt, even when they tried to hide their feelings. During visits to the orphanage the family supported, he consistently gravitated toward children who were going through the most difficult moments of their healing process. When the twins turned 5, the family established a new tradition called Family Gratitude Nights. Once a month, they gathered in the old library, where Eleanor held her prayers. They lit candles and shared stories about people who had helped them, moments when they felt protected or guided, and special dreams or feelings they'd experienced. These family gatherings became opportunities to pass on wisdom about the balance between rational thinking and spiritual openness, about how to recognize and trust intuitive guidance, and about the responsibility that comes with being blessed with abundance and special capacities. During one of these gatherings, when the twins were 8 years old, something extraordinary happened, something that demonstrated the continuity of spiritual protection across generations. Gabriel suddenly looked up during silent meditation and said, "Grandma Eleanor is here. She wants you to know she's very proud of how our family helps other children, and that Grandma Hope is always with us too." Hope immediately nodded in agreement and added, "They want us to know that when we grow up, our job will be to help even more people, especially children who have lost parents, like Daddy lost his mommy." These spontaneous statements, from children who were too young to have been coached or influenced by adult expectations, provided powerful confirmation for Mauricio and Isabella that spiritual protection and guidance were indeed continuing through generations, manifesting through natural intuitive abilities that their children had inherited. As the years passed, evidence accumulated that spiritual forces were continuing to work through the Santa Marina family in ways that benefited not only themselves, but countless other people. Business decisions guided by a combination of rational analysis and intuitive insights consistently led to outcomes that were profitable, but also ethically sound and socially beneficial. Investment choices frequently avoided companies that later were discovered to be involved in environmental destruction, worker exploitation, or financial fraud, problems that conventional due diligence hadn't detected, but that spiritual guidance had warned against. Philanthropic decisions, guided by dreams, feelings, and family meditation consistently identified organizations and individuals who made extraordinary differences with the resources they received, while avoiding others that appeared worthwhile on the surface, but that weren't actually using donations effectively. The Hope Santa Marina Fund grew to become one of the most respected charitable organizations in Latin America, known not only for its effective programs, but also for its uncanny ability to identify and support individuals who went on to make significant contributions in their communities. Many of the young people who received educational support through the fund later became teachers, social workers, psychologists, and community leaders who specialized in helping others overcome trauma and loss. Some developed their own intuitive capacities and went on to establish similar programs in other regions, creating a network of healing that spread far beyond the original scope of the Santa Marina family's efforts. By the time Mauricio reached his 60th birthday, he had become recognized internationally as a business leader who successfully combined profit-driven decisions with ethical considerations and social responsibility. His approach to business, based on a combination of rigorous analysis and spiritual guidance, was studied in business schools and written about in management journals. But for Mauricio, the most meaningful recognition came from letters that the family received from hundreds of young adults who had been helped during their childhood trauma by programs funded through the Esperanza Fund. These letters described not only the practical help they had received, but also the intangible sense of being cared for and watched over that had helped them develop resilience and hope during their darkest periods. Reading these letters, Mauricio understood that the spiritual protection that had surrounded his own life through Eleanor's dedication was now extending to touch the lives of countless others, through channels that neither Eleanor nor Hope could have imagined when they first began their invisible work of protecting his family decades earlier. In final analysis, the story of Mauricio, Eleanor, and the continuing spiritual presence of Hope demonstrated that love, when it is genuine and selfless enough, finds ways to multiply itself exponentially, creating ripples of healing, protection, and positive influence that extend far beyond the original circumstances that created that love in the first place. The lesson that emerged from their extraordinary story was that spiritual realities, while often inexplicable through conventional means, are nevertheless fundamentally practical in their effects. Faith, when it is based on genuine experience rather than blind belief, provides guidance that can lead to decisions and actions that benefit not only ourselves, but also create legacies of positive influence that persist through generations and touch the lives of people we may never meet in person. Through their example, the Santa Marina family showed that spiritual sensitivity, when combined with rational intelligence and ethical commitment, creates a form of wisdom that is uniquely powerful for addressing the complex challenges that face individuals, families, and communities in a modern world where traditional sources of guidance often feel inadequate to navigate the unprecedented complexities of contemporary life. Their story continues to inspire others to remain open to forms of guidance and protection that transcend conventional understanding, while maintaining a commitment to using whatever gifts and resources they receive in service of others who are struggling with challenges similar to those that they themselves have successfully overcome through a combination of rational effort and spiritual support.